Death is not the end. That's the lie you've been told. From the moment you were old enough to ask where we go when we die, the answers you got were vague, fear-based, or hollow. A heaven far away, a hell if you're bad, or worse, nothing at all. A void, a shutdown. You were taught to fear it, avoid it, or pretend it's too mysterious to understand. But what if that's exactly what they wanted? What if death, far from being unknowable, has always had a map, and that map was buried in plain sight? The ancient Egyptians didn't guess what happens when we die. They documented it. The Book of the Dead isn't a dusty myth or relic. It's a guidebook for the soul, passed down from a civilization that understood something we've forgotten. It doesn't just describe death, it charts a journey. And if you've ever felt like something about life or death has been hidden from you, then you're about to remember what they hoped you'd never uncover. They say the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with death, that they built their entire civilization around preparing for the afterlife, that their tombs, temples, rituals, and hieroglyphs were all morbid fixations on what happens when the body dies. But they weren't obsessed with death, they were obsessed with the truth. And what they left behind wasn't fear-based superstition. It was a spiritual technology so advanced. Modern science is only now starting to glimpse fragments of what they understood. The Book of the Dead wasn't a book in the traditional sense. It was a collection of texts, spells, incantations, and visual codes, passed down, rewritten, and refined across generations, to serve one purpose: to guide the soul after death. Not in theory, not as a metaphor, but as a literal, step-by-step roadmap for consciousness to navigate the multidimensional realms that lie beyond physical form. These weren't decorative symbols carved into tomb walls to comfort grieving families. They were precise, energetic instructions designed to help the soul escape fear, bypass illusion, and ascend beyond karmic entrapment. To the Egyptians, death was not a tragedy. It was a transition, a shift, a movement from one state of awareness to another. And just like you wouldn't walk into a foreign country without a map, they believed no soul should pass into the afterlife without guidance. That's what the Book of the Dead was. A soul map, a metaphysical manual, a blueprint for what comes after, and how to meet it with clarity, power, and spiritual sovereignty. It's easy now, from the comfort of modern life, to dismiss these ideas as myth. But when you strip away the religious filters and cultural bias, what you find is something remarkably aligned with what cutting-edge science and near-death research are beginning to suggest. Quantum theory points toward non-local consciousness, awareness that exists independent of the brain. Near-death experiences speak of tunnels, beings of light, judgment moments, and life reviews, descriptions eerily similar to what the Egyptians laid out thousands of years ago. They weren't guessing. They were remembering. They encoded what others have only just started to rediscover. And it goes deeper. The spells in the Book of the Dead weren't magic tricks. They were vibrational keys, words of power designed to activate protection, clarity, and divine support in the post-physical journey. Every deity mentioned wasn't just a god to be worshipped, but an archetype representing a part of the soul's inner reality. Every trial wasn't a punishment, but a symbolic confrontation with one's own fear, shame, or ego. This wasn't religion. It was an initiation. And some of these insights are simply too ancient and too powerful for YouTube. That's why we created the Insights Academy newsletter. Sign up at the link below and get instant access to hidden truths, plus a free copy of the Kybalion for a limited time only. Modern society has reduced death to a clinical event. Heart stops, brain dies, game over. But for the Egyptians, that's when the real journey began. They believed that consciousness, unshackled from the body, must pass through a series of gates, each guarded by forces, challenges, and illusions. And only those prepared could navigate it successfully. That's why these texts were placed inside tombs, not for the living, but for the dead. Instructions for the soul, guidance for the unknown. But the tragedy is that most of us enter death with no preparation, no understanding, and no tools, because somewhere along the way, that knowledge was lost. Or perhaps it wasn't lost. Perhaps it was hidden, suppressed, rebranded as myth to keep people afraid, because a population afraid of death is easier to control. A soul that doesn't question what comes next will cling to this life with desperation, always seeking safety, approval, and comfort, never realizing that it has been trained to forget its own immortality. But once you begin to remember, once you see that the ancients left us a map, something shifts. You begin to sense that the fear of death is artificial, that your soul was never meant to walk blind, that you've been here before, and that the next chapter doesn't have to be a mystery. It can be a homecoming. When the final breath leaves the body, something stirs, something ancient, something aware. For most, this moment is the end of everything they've ever known. But according to the wisdom of the Book of the Dead, it is only the beginning of the true journey. And like any journey, the first question is always the same. Where are you going? The ancient Egyptians weren't content with vague answers. They mapped it all out, the stages, the gates, the guardians. They believed the soul didn't just drift off into a formless cloud of bliss or punishment. It moved through a structured, multi-dimensional process. And understanding that process was the difference between liberation and entrapment. To them, the afterlife wasn't a destination. It was a system of passage, a series of tests and transformations designed to mirror the inner state of the soul. Central to this is the understanding that you are not oneself. You are a composite being. The Egyptians described the soul as made of many parts. The life force. The personality or emotional body. And the fully realized, luminous self that emerges after transformation. These weren't poetic metaphors. They were detailed models of consciousness. When the body dies, the K returns to the source of vitality. The Ba roams the world or the afterlife. And the Ach is the goal, the divine self that awakens only when you pass through death consciously. This is where the Book of the Dead comes in. Its texts act as energetic instructions for these soul components, especially the Ba, as it navigates the Duat, the Egyptian name for the realm of the dead. But the Duat isn't just a place, it's a reflection, a projection of the soul's state. You don't just encounter beings, you encounter yourself, magnified, your fears, your regrets, your attachments. This realm is layered, symbolic, and deeply responsive to your vibration. Throughout the journey, the soul encounters a series of gates, each one guarded by entities that aren't necessarily enemies, but they aren't neutral either. They serve one purpose: to test the soul's readiness. To stand before them, you need not weapons, but remembrance. You need to speak the correct words, recite the correct spell, not because it's a magical incantation, but because it reflects inner truth. The spell is a code, a frequency match. If you are aligned, the gate opens. If you're not, you remain caught in lower vibrations, looping through confusion, fear, or amnesia. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Book of the Dead is how precise it is. Spell 125, for example, details the declaration of innocence, a list of affirmations the soul must speak before judgment. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not slain. But again, this isn't a moral checklist. It's a vibrational tuning. Each statement aligns you with the heart's frequency. It's less about being good in a societal sense, and more about being in resonance with Ma'at, the universal principle of balance, truth, and harmony. In many ways, the entire journey is about resonance. The afterlife doesn't judge you, you judge you. The gods aren't punishing you, they're reflecting you. The gates aren't locked, they're coded to your state of being. This isn't a place of eternal torment or reward. It's a mirror of the life you lived, and more importantly, the consciousness you cultivated. This isn't far removed from what's emerging today in the fields of quantum physics and near-death research. Many who return from clinical death report, entering realms where thought shapes reality, where intentions manifest instantly, where guides and beings appear not as external forces, but as aspects of the self. These aren't random hallucinations. They are echoes of what the Egyptians inscribed thousands of years ago. So when you think about death, strip away the fear. Imagine instead a process, a structured unfolding, a journey that responds to who you are beneath the surface. Because according to the ancients, the journey doesn't begin when your heart stops. It begins the moment you choose to wake up. And death simply makes it impossible to hide from yourself any longer. In the modern world, the concept of judgment after death has been weaponized, turned into a source of fear, guilt, and shame. It's been used to control people in life, to keep them obedient, small, and afraid of their own instincts. The imagery is always the same: a throne, a god, a courtroom, someone outside of you deciding your fate. But in the Book of the Dead, the most iconic scene, the weighing of the heart, is not a threat. It is an invitation. The scene is simple on the surface. The soul stands before a set of scales. On one side is the heart, the record of your life. On the other, a single feather, the symbol of Ma'at, the principle of truth and universal balance. If your heart is as light as the feather, you pass. If it is heavy, you are devoured by a beast called Amit, and the journey ends. That's the version most people know, but what they miss is the deeper meaning behind it all. This isn't a divine punishment. It's not about perfection or sin. It's about emotional, spiritual, energetic weight. The heart isn't just a metaphor, it's a storage device. It holds on to everything you never released, every lie you told yourself, every time you betrayed your truth, every fear you swallowed, every shame you never looked at. The heavier the heart, the more it pulls you down, not to hell, but into lower frequencies, into forgetfulness, into a state where awakening becomes more difficult. And the feather? The feather isn't just lightness, it's alignment. Ma'at represents more than truth. It is the cosmic order, the harmony that underlies all things. The feather is your natural state, when you are no longer burdened by false identities, attachments, and illusions. The weighing of the heart is not someone else's judgment. It is yours. It's your own resonance meeting the truth of the universe. The judgment scene is also profoundly psychological. The Egyptian soul doesn't just stand silently. It speaks. It declares. In spell 125, the soul states, "I have not done this. I have not done that," affirming its innocence not to plead, but to align. These declarations are energy work, affirmations that cleanse and purify the soul's field. You're not convincing a god, you're speaking into the frequency of truth, tuning your heart toward lightness. Now compare that to how we live today. Most of us are taught to hide, to suppress, to push down what we feel, what we know, what we want. We lie to ourselves more than to anyone else. We chase approval, even when it kills our joy. We stay silent when we should speak, smile when we feel like screaming, and carry weights we were never meant to hold. And over time, the heart becomes heavy, not because we're bad, but because we've forgotten how to let go. The weighing of the heart reminds us that freedom isn't given. It's earned through self-honesty, through release, through remembering who you are beyond the noise. And it tells us something even more powerful. No one is coming to save you, because no one needs to. The judge isn't Osiris. The judge is your own soul. Osiris is simply the presence that allows truth to be seen. In that sacred moment, when the heart is laid bare, everything false falls away. There's no status, no titles, no likes, no followers, no opinions of others. Just you, your choices, your resonance. And if your heart is light, not from perfection, but from courage, from truth, from love, you pass not into a paradise, but into your own becoming. This isn't a warning, it's a gift, a message passed down through thousands of years, from a civilization that knew that death wasn't the punishment. Living without truth was, and it's not too late. Every breath is a chance to empty what burdens you, to bring the heart back to stillness, to release the shame, the fear, the weight. Because in the end, it's not about being judged, it's about becoming weightless enough to rise. We often think of death as something final, a line that once crossed, can't be undone. But in spiritual traditions across the world, death is not just a moment that ends the body, it is a doorway, a rite of passage. And for those who seek to understand the deeper layers of consciousness, it's something that happens long before your final breath. Because to truly live awake, something within you has to die first, and that something is the ego. The ancient Egyptians understood this. The Book of the Dead isn't just about the physical death of the body. It's about the symbolic death of everything false, everything constructed, everything that keeps you chained to illusion. This is why the journey through the afterlife is filled with obstacles, mirrors, and trials. The soul must shed its false identities, one by one, until only the truth remains. Not the version of you created to please others, not the mask you wear to feel safe, but the core, the eternal, the part of you that cannot be destroyed. Ego death is not a modern invention. It's the oldest initiation in human history. Every ancient mystery school, whether in Egypt, Greece, India, or Mesoamerica, knew that if you wanted to awaken, you had to be stripped bare. You had to die before you died. And that process wasn't gentle. It was raw, chaotic, painful. Because the ego doesn't surrender easily. It clings. It defends. It tells you that without it, you'll disappear. But that's the illusion. The ego dies, and you finally see that you were never the name, the status, the body, or the story. You were the awareness watching it all unfold. In the Egyptian texts, death is depicted not as annihilation, but as transformation. The trials in the duat aren't punishments. They are alchemical fires. Each challenge, each confrontation with a deity or a gatekeeper is a test of vibration. The soul is forced to look at itself, its attachments, its fears, its self-deceptions. And those who refuse to let go cannot move forward. Not because they're unworthy, but because they're still clinging to the version of themselves that cannot survive the higher realms. Modern spiritual language often romanticizes ego death. But the truth is, it's messy. It doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in waves. Each time you let go of an old belief, a false identity, a role that kept you small. It happens when you stop needing to be right, to be seen, to be validated. It happens when you realize that being honest with yourself is more important than being accepted by others. And here's the real secret. Ego death isn't just preparation for the afterlife. It's how you access higher consciousness now. The Egyptians didn't study the afterlife because they feared it. They studied it because they wanted to live fully. They knew that by understanding death, they could transcend fear, live with clarity, and anchor themselves in what actually matters. They weren't afraid of the darkness. They walked through it. Not because they were fearless, but because they had the tools. They had the rituals, the teachings, the inner maps. They understood that rebirth doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from facing it directly, from dying to illusion so you can awaken to the truth. When the ego dies, what remains is not emptiness. It's presence, it's silence, it's knowing without needing to prove. And in that space, the the illuminated, divine self, can emerge. That's the real destination. Not heaven, not reward, but embodiment of your highest self, free from distortion. This was the initiation encoded in the Book of the Dead, and it's still available now. You don't have to wait until your final breath to meet your soul. You can begin the process of dying to who you're not, so you can finally live as who you are. That is the gift of conscious death. And it's what every spiritual path, at its core, has always pointed to. Not an ending, but a return. At first glance, ancient Egyptian art looks like decoration, intricate carvings, curious animal-headed beings. mysterious poses and symbols arranged in symmetrical beauty across tomb walls and papyrus scrolls. But what if those symbols weren't just art? What if they were a language, a coded system designed to transmit knowledge, not to the logical mind, but directly to the soul? To truly understand the Book of the Dead, you have to stop seeing it as literature and start seeing it as technology. Every glyph, every figure, every ritual was constructed with intention. They were never meant to be merely seen. They were meant to be activated. These weren't allegories. They were vibrational keys. And the ones who knew how to read them weren't scholars. They were initiates. Egyptian spiritual symbolism operated on multiple levels. You could read a symbol on the surface, what it appeared to represent in the physical world, and you could also read it energetically, metaphorically, cosmologically, and even neurologically. Take Anubis, for example, the jackal-headed god who oversees embalming and guides the soul to the afterlife. To the uninitiated, Anubis is just another deity in the pantheon. But to the initiated, he's more than that. He is the archetype of the inner guide, the part of you that knows how to walk through the darkness. He is instinct, refined into intuition. He is the guardian of the liminal space between death and rebirth. The same goes for the ritual objects and postures seen in funerary art. The crook and flail, held by Osiris, represent rulership, but not over others. They are symbols of inner mastery, compassion and discipline, softness and strength, integrated. The Eye of Horus? It's not just a symbol of protection. It encodes information about brain anatomy, specifically the pineal gland, the so-called seat of the soul. This wasn't a coincidence. This was knowledge hidden in plain sight. The Egyptians knew that language alone couldn't convey the full truth. Words are bound by culture, time, and limitation. But symbols speak to the unconscious. They bypass the filters of the ego and awaken memory. That's why so much of the Book of the Dead is visual. Because you're not meant to just understand it. You're meant to feel it, to remember it, to activate something ancient that still lives within you. Their rituals, too, weren't just ceremonial. They were frequency generators. When a body was mummified, when incantations were spoken over it, when symbols were painted and amulets placed, each of these steps served an energetic function. To preserve not just the body, but the soul's clarity, to encode the astral field with guidance, to anchor the consciousness so it could navigate the trials ahead. The truth is, the Egyptians saw the universe as a series of mirrored realities, as above, so below. The physical was never separate from the spiritual. It was a gateway. And so every physical action they took had metaphysical significance. Pouring water wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about purification. Lighting incense wasn't just for scent, it was an offering to open dimensional space. These weren't superstitions. They were precise technologies, passed down through initiation and guarded by the priesthood for thousands of years. And yet, today, much of that understanding has been buried under the weight of academic dismissal and cultural arrogance. We've reduced these symbols to mythology, forgetting that myth is often just truth encrypted in story. We see rituals as irrelevant relics, not realizing they were always meant to be repeated, not copied blindly, but reinterpreted through direct experience. Because these symbols still work, these frequencies are still alive. You just have to remember how to use them. And maybe, deep down, you already do. Maybe that's why some images in the Book of the Dead stir something in you. Not fear, but familiarity. Not superstition, but a subtle memory. Because these aren't just remnants of an ancient culture. They're fragments of a language your soul once spoke, and now you're starting to hear it again. The greatest form of control is not burning books, it's convincing people they were never worth reading, and that's exactly what happened with the Book of the Dead. Over time, the texts that once guided souls through eternity were reduced to museum pieces, stripped of meaning, flattened into mythology. The message was clear. This isn't knowledge. It's fantasy. Primitive, outdated, irrelevant. But what if that wasn't an accident? What if the real reason these teachings were buried was because they threatened the foundations of the very systems we live under today? When the West encountered ancient Egypt, it didn't seek to understand it. It sought to possess it. Colonial powers looted temples, stole scrolls, and placed sacred relics behind glass, declaring the culture dead while parading its stolen wisdom as exotic art. Academics translated the texts with clinical detachment, severing them from their spiritual roots. Rituals became rituals in quotation marks. Gods were downgraded to characters in myth. And the real meaning, the instructions, the energetic blueprints, the initiation path, was lost in the translation, or more accurately, deliberately erased. The rise of monotheistic religions accelerated this erasure. Anything that didn't fit into the new narrative of sin, salvation, and a singular path to God was declared heresy, blasphemy, or worse, pagan. And so the Book of the Dead, with its multi-layered soul, its non-linear afterlife, its self-directed judgment, was far too dangerous. It implied that you didn't need a priest to speak for you, that you didn't need to earn your place in eternity through obedience, that the soul was powerful enough, sovereign enough, to navigate the afterlife alone, if properly prepared. That was never going to be allowed. Instead, the collective worldview was reshaped to fear death, to view it as punishment or finality, to imagine the afterlife as a place of reward for conformity or eternal torture for rebellion, heaven or hell, obey or suffer. This isn't spiritual truth, it's spiritual politics, and it's designed to make you small, to make you forget that entire civilizations once prepared their people for death with dignity, with knowledge, and with empowerment. That death was not a threat, it was a graduation. Even science joined the effort. In the age of rationalism, anything that couldn't be measured was ridiculed. Spiritual experiences were dismissed as hallucinations, symbols as nonsense, and the soul as a delusion. But look closely, and you'll see the irony. Modern physics now points to non-locality, to consciousness not being confined to the brain, to particles behaving differently when observed. These discoveries don't contradict ancient teachings, they confirm them. But by the time science came full circle, the cultural damage had already been done. Education systems never taught you this history. Most people graduate without knowing that the Book of the Dead even exists, let alone what it contains. And if they do hear of it, it's in the same breath as fairy tales and mythology, as something dead, like the mummies in the museums. But this isn't just the loss of cultural heritage, it's the loss of spiritual direction. Because when you don't know what death is, you don't know what life is either. You live reacting to fear instead of responding to truth. You chase safety instead of seeking meaning. You become easy to manage, predictable, compliant. That's the point. A society disconnected from death is a society easier to control. And a person disconnected from the soul's journey is someone who will trade truth for comfort, purpose for possessions, freedom for familiarity. The Egyptians didn't live that way. They spent their entire lives preparing for the moment of transition, not because they feared it, but because they respected it. Because they knew that to die well, you had to live well, with integrity, with courage, with remembrance. And maybe that's why these teachings were buried. Not because they were obsolete, but because they were too powerful. Because a person who remembers who they are, who knows what death is and what it isn't, is not afraid to live freely, not afraid to speak, to feel, to create, and certainly not afraid to die. For thousands of years, the teachings of the Book of the Dead were dismissed as mythology, imaginative tales from a civilization obsessed with death. But if you listen closely to the experiences of people today, those who have come face to face with the edge of existence, you begin to hear something eerily familiar. Because while the world may have forgotten the wisdom of the ancients, death has not. And every so often, it whispers the same truth through other voices. Near-death experiences, reported by people across cultures, religions, and backgrounds, describe phenomena that should not be possible. Consciousness continuing after brain activity stops. life reviews that unfold outside of time, encounters with luminous beings who communicate without words, a tunnel, a threshold, a feeling of being observed, not judged, but deeply seen. And always, there is the sense of returning, not to somewhere new, but to somewhere deeply remembered. These accounts echo almost perfectly what the Book of the Dead described: the journey through otherworldly realms, the presence of guardians, the confronting of one's life as a vibrational field rather than a list of events, the idea that thought and emotion shape the environment of the soul. These are not New Age fantasies. They are the same messages, spoken in new tongues, through people who touched the veil and came back. Then there are the reports from psychedelic explorers, those who have entered altered states through sacred plants and compounds used for millennia in spiritual traditions. DMT, in particular, often leads users into realms that defy language, landscapes of impossible geometry, beings of light, encounters with a consciousness far greater than their own. The experience is often described not as a hallucination, but as more real than real. And again, the parallels are striking. Psychedelic journeys, like the trials of the Duat, confront the user with themselves. They force a letting go. They expose the attachments, fears, and egoic constructs that bind us to lower frequencies. Just as the Egyptian soul must speak the truth at each gate, the psychedelic traveler must surrender illusion, or remain trapped in looped patterns and fragmented perception. The journey only opens when the ego lets go. Quantum physics, too, is beginning to brush against these ancient truths. The idea that observation changes reality, that particles exist in multiple states until measured. That time is not linear. That consciousness may not be produced by the brain, but instead be received through it, like a signal through a radio. These ideas mirror the cosmology encoded in the Book of the Dead, where the soul is not confined to one form or one place, but exists on multiple levels of awareness, navigating realms of thought and spirit. What we are beginning to understand now through science and medicine, the Egyptians laid out in sacred texts over 3,000 years ago. They weren't guessing. They weren't speculating. They were mapping. They were documenting a process that happens not just at the end of life, but throughout it, for those willing to look within. The Duat isn't just where the soul travels after death. It's the realm you touch in dreams, in altered states, in the moments between sleep and wake, silence and sound, thought and knowing. And this is why these teachings still matter, because they don't belong to a time. They belong to consciousness itself. They point us back to what we've always known deep down, that this life is not the whole story, that reality is not what it seems, that we are not just flesh and memory, but presence and awareness, journeying through a layered, intelligent cosmos that responds not to belief, but to vibration. The ancients used symbols and stories, because that was the only way to speak of what cannot be fully spoken. But now, the veil is thinner. People are remembering through their own experiences, on operating tables, in deep meditation, under the stars, and through sacred medicine. Different paths, same truth. The map is re-emerging. The language is shifting, and the deeper message remains unchanged. You are not your body, and death is not your end. It is the portal through which truth becomes unavoidable. The teachings of the Book of the Dead were never meant to be locked in tombs or buried beneath museums. They were designed to be lived, not worshipped, but applied. Every line of hieroglyph, every image of a god, every spell etched into ancient stone was a guide, one that pointed to a truth far deeper than religion. It wasn't about death. It was about mastery. And that mastery wasn't reserved for kings or priests. It was for anyone willing to walk the path of remembrance. The path, however, begins with responsibility. If you've forgotten who you are, it's not entirely your fault. But waking up, that is on you. And once you understand what the Egyptians were trying to show us, you begin to see that every moment is a chance to return to that ancient knowledge, not through imitation, but through integration. This isn't about reviving old rituals just to feel spiritual. It's about embodying what they were pointing toward, sovereignty of the soul, clarity of mind, lightness of heart. Start here. Ask yourself, what am I carrying that is making my heart heavy? Is it shame, guilt, the need to be accepted, fear of being judged? These aren't just emotional struggles. They are energetic weights. And every day you keep them, your soul forgets a little more of what it's here to do. The weighing of the heart isn't an event that happens once after death. It happens slowly, day by day, in the quiet moments when you lie to yourself to keep the peace, when you play small because it's safer, when you know better but choose comfort over growth. But you can reverse it. You can begin to live in a way that keeps your heart light, your energy clear, your soul awake. The Egyptians didn't wait until the moment of death to prepare. Their entire lives were oriented around spiritual alignment. Through conscious living, ritual, reflection, and the pursuit of harmony with Ma'at, you can do the same. You can reclaim that focus. Start by watching your thoughts, not to control them, but to notice how often they come from fear instead of truth. Start questioning your beliefs, not to discard them, but to trace their roots. Start speaking with intention, moving with presence, choosing honesty, even when it costs you comfort. Because the truth is, you are already on the journey. Death is just the most visible initiation, but every challenge you face now is preparing you for it. Every loss, every betrayal, every dark night of the soul, it's not punishment, it's rehearsal. It's the duat showing up in your life while you're still breathing, asking you, are you ready to let go of what no longer serves you? Are you ready to meet yourself without the filters? And that's where real power begins, not in conquering the world, but in becoming unshakably rooted in your essence. The soul that knows who it is cannot be manipulated. It doesn't cling to validation or status. It doesn't crumble under pressure or comparison. It moves from truth, and that movement is magnetic. The Egyptians called this becoming the Ach, the luminous one, the transfigured self. And that transformation isn't locked in a sarcophagus or reserved for saints. It begins the moment you decide that numbness isn't enough, that surviving isn't the same as living, that you'd rather face the unknown than stay asleep one more day. The Book of the Dead was never about finality. It was about freedom. It was a reminder that death is not the enemy. Forgetfulness is. That the greatest tragedy isn't dying, but never knowing who you were while you lived. You don't need to become anything new. You need to remember. You need to strip away the noise until what remains is light, and what rises is real. We fear what we don't understand, and we've been trained, generation after generation, to see death as a full stop, a tragic ending, a void. But what if it's none of those things? What if death is not a punishment, not a failure of the body, not even a separation but a return, not to nothingness, but to the truth of what we've always been beneath the noise, the fear, the form? The Book of the Dead was never obsessed with death. It was obsessed with what lies behind it. To the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. The moment where the veil lifted and everything you pretended to be falls away, where no masks can follow and no illusions can survive. You don't take your status, your image, your wealth. You take your frequency. That's what moves forward. That's what is met by the guardians. That's what passes through the gates. And in that journey, everything becomes clear. They understood something we've forgotten, that the soul is not here to be comfortable. It's here to evolve. And every moment of your life is a step in that evolution. Every relationship, every challenge, every quiet moment where you hear a voice inside say, "This isn't who I am." That's the soul knocking on the inside of your skin, reminding you that you were never meant to stay asleep, reminding you that this life is the initiation, and death is just the moment you see what it all added up to. You won't be asked what you achieved. You'll be asked if you remembered. Did you live in alignment? Did you love fully? Did you listen to the truth, even when it was inconvenient? Did you let go of the masks, the roles, the walls? Did you choose presence, even in pain? That's what lightens the heart. That's what makes you free. The Book of the Dead wasn't a prophecy. It was a mirror. It didn't claim to show you a heaven or a hell based on judgment. It showed you yourself. And the most profound thing it teaches is that you're not waiting for death to begin that process. You're in it, right now. Every breath you take is a step through the duat. Every decision, a gate. Every truth you speak, every fear you face. Every time you choose soul over safety, you move closer to the Ach, the awakened, radiant self. This isn't about religion. It's about remembrance, about undoing the numbness that's been wrapped around your spirit. The Egyptians didn't just build pyramids, they built reminders, monuments to the eternal, not because they feared death, but because they wanted to master it, because they knew something our world desperately needs to remember, that you don't have to fear the end when you've lived in truth. You don't need golden tombs or funerary texts to pass the gates. You need presence. You need clarity. You need courage. And above all, you need to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Because when you carry that with you, nothing can hold you down. Not fear, not an illusion, not even death. And if you haven't joined the Insights Academy newsletter yet, you're leaving knowledge on the table. Some truths just can't be spoken publicly, and we share them all there, along with your free copy of the Kybalion, available for a limited time only. Don't miss what could shift everything. The ancients weren't trying to scare us. They were trying to prepare us, not for destruction, but for return. Return to the self. Return to source. Return to the awareness that you are, and always were, infinite. You've just forgotten. And now, maybe, you're starting to remember. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.